Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Top 10 edition of Magic Mics, proudly sponsored by our Patreon supporters and CoolStuffInc.com. You can find cool stuff in stock every day, and check out our co-sponsor, CardHoarder.com, offering the best inventory prices and delivery of cards for Magic Online. And finally, check out our altar sleeves. Support the show by using the code MAGICMICS at checkout for 5% off anything in the store, including a set of exclusive sleeves featuring the Magic Mics crew at altarsleeves.com/magicmics. I am Evan Irwin, and we get started each week by saying hello to my two co-hosts, Aaron Campbell.
How's it going?
Ruben Bressler.
Buenos dias. How's it going?
Everything is lovely.
Yeah.
We'll get our retro shades on. We're going to look to the past.
That's right.
This is, I mean, look, the cast, hasn't been here forever. We started at one point in Magic, and so we said, look, we got to talk about all those cool cards and all those cool sets, beginning with Hour of Devastation. Maybe we could go back and talk about the other cards in the other sets, and we started there, so we start backward the other way, looking at Amonkhet.
We also have the luxury of history because so many times when we do a top 10 of a set, it's usually when that set has just come out.
Right.
And so we've only had our pre-release experiences or our early access experiences. We will actually be able to look back on it. Like, I think if you had asked me when Amonkhet had just come out, what's going to be a hit and what am I going to like, flash forward to 4 years later, very different answers.
Oh, of course. I mean, there's probably red cards on your list this time. Yeah, I've got my retro Magic Grand Prix shades.
Wow.
So there we go. Yeah, remember Grand Prix? Me neither. But I have these shades. So
very cool. Well, that will be exciting. I know there were definitely cards where I was like, this would 100% been on my list had we made it right when it was released. But no longer. Either way, we begin with our choice of the top comment from last week in a segment we call Honorable Mention, where Ruben will tell us who is the most eloquent, letting us know what card we did not choose as one of our top 10 Svetlin Velenov cards. Ruben?
Well, Vinny the Web Surfer had a comment that I really enjoyed, which is, when it comes to Eldraine, I go back and forth on some of the references. And of all the cards Svetlin did for this set, and of all the references, his depiction of Monty Python's Black Knight with Oathsworn Knight is a masterclass of taking something from pop culture and blending it thoroughly within Magic's own world, and for the setting of Eldraine. He and the other designers behind the card aced that test.
Very nice. Oathsworn Giant, if you don't know, is a rare from Throne of Eldraine.
You said Oathsworn Giant. It's Oathsworn Knight.
I had Giants on the brain. Oathsworn Knight is a rare from Throne of Eldraine for 2 black and a generic mana. It's a 0/0 creature human knight. It enters the battlefield with 4 +1/+1 counters on it. It must attack each combat, and if damage were to be dealt to it while it has a +1/+1 counter on it, prevent that damage and remove a counter from it. And that's awesome.
So it sort of behaves like the phantom creatures from like Judgment, but has the flavor of the Black Knight, which, has the 4 limbs that continually get cut off, and 'tis only a flesh wound, and it continues to attack, which is lovely.
Absolutely.
Very good. Very good work.
Very nice. Thank you, Vinny the Web Surfer. Please contact us on social media for your prize. Thanks again to CoolStuffInc.com for sponsoring this giveaway, and stay tuned for our top 10 list this week, and maybe you can win next week's free gift certificate, because it is time to talk about the Amonkhets, the brick counters, the exertions,
the embalm.
The embalms. Yeah. Absolutely. Let's go ahead and get started here with number 10. Aaron, what's number 10?
Well, I'm going to drop an embalm right here. Did you get that? Yeah, right there. This card, I had the privilege. I've been creating Magic content for about 6 or 7 years now, and I've been blessed to have received a lot of preview cards as part of this show. And I've also received, preview cards as part of other things. But this was the first time I had ever received one as myself, as Aaron Campbell, not attached to any projects, not being part of any shows I was doing. This was just for me to reveal on my Twitter account. And it means a lot to me to this day. My number 10 is Sacred Cat. So Sacred Cat is 1 white. It's a creature cat with lifelink, an embalm of 1, which means that you can exile this card from your graveyard. You create a token that's a copy of it, except it's a white zombie cat with no mana cost, and embalm is only done as a sorcery, and it has 1 power and 1 toughness. So this may not look like much, but this card did see play in Standard in the God Pharaoh's Gifts decks, because you would, this would be an early blocker, and then you could bring it back as a 4/4 with God Pharaoh's Gift. It also sees play in Legacy and Vintage sometimes in these standstill decks, because you're not casting this. And so you can, pitch this with things like Thirst of Knowledge. And then while you're playing that standstill of who's going to cast a spell first, here's just a crappy 1/1 with lifelink. And sometimes it just gets there. And so it makes me so happy to see this card show up sometimes. And I just think of how big it was and the response to this card. And I'd never previewed a card by myself before. And Who knows? I may get to preview another one soon.
Yeah, I mean, embalming for so cheaply is a huge deal. A lot of the creatures in Amonkhet that had embalm, they were, reasonably costed on the front end, but then 2 or 3 more mana
They
on
were afraid,
the embalm cost. Yeah, they were a little afraid of what embalm could do.
Right.
This one being a 1 that could embalm for 1, I mean, anything that costs less than 2 mana is going to have a chance to do things in older formats, and this one was able to do that.
Absolutely. It surprised me a little bit that this actually saw some play, because at the end of the day, it's a 1/1 lifelink for 1 mana, but playing it out of your graveyard. Sometimes Mishra's Factories and Sacred Cats.
And it was a nightmare for aggro decks because it was 2 lifelinking bodies for 2 mana.
Yeah, it would hold you back for multiple turns, which was a thing.
Yeah, and then in the God Pharaoh's Gifts deck, it was basically a Thragtusk. If you could live to the point where you had GPG online, you're bringing back 4/4 lifelinks with haste, and good luck getting around that.
That's real, absolutely.
Yeah.
Ruben, what's number 10?
My number 10 is, I mean, I've got a lot of red cards on my list. This is the era when aggro red made its real comeback. This was when red decks won 3 of 4 Pro Tours or something like that. And this card was a key piece of that success in both what was called Comeback Red for Paulo at Pro Tour Hour of Devastation in Kyoto, and then later part of Wyatt Darby's Pro Tour Dominaria winning deck. My number 10 is On-Crop Crasher. On-Crop Crasher is 2 colorless and a red for a 3/2 Minotaur Warrior with haste, and it has Exert. When you may exert On-Crop Crasher as it attacks. When you do, target creature can't block this turn. An exerted creature won't untap during your next untap step. So Exert was sort of like, you can put a little bit of extra oomph in one attack step to get an additional bonus. This one making things like Sacred Cat unable to block for the turn, allowing your Bomat Couriers and your Earthshaker Kenraz to be able to get through for additional damage early. And you could also just have a 3/2 with haste on an empty board after a Fumigate happens or something along those lines.
Yeah, I had On-Crop Crasher in a red-green aggro deck in Historic just the other day. I was looking at decks and I was like, oh, wow, I totally forgot about that creature. And it totally did get me by a bunch of giant monsters, because it's okay, that don't block, get you. And it's also a question of what's a turn worth? That was the question of Exert. What's a turn worth? Would you give up a turn so that doesn't mess you up this turn? That's always the question. But On-Crop was always fantastic. Limited, constructed, card was dope.
Yeah, exactly. It always had good value. It's a 3/2 for 3 with haste. So it's already well above rate, and then being able to turn things off from blocking for no cost was absolutely huge.
Yeah, exertion not needing life or mana was huge.
Just keep it tapped for a turn. Who cares?
So this is my number 10. It's a weird card. It's a weird card. Okay, this is a weird. It's worth 58 cents or whatever.
Is it weird?
It's super weird card. All right, it doesn't make sense what it's really doing. But it's one of these cards that one day, mark my words, one day, Shadow of the Grave is going to be a $30 card out of nowhere.
Yeah.
Because nothing does what it does exactly. This card is just so strange. Shadow of the Grave is a black and a generic mana for a rare instant that says return to your hand all cards in your graveyard that you cycled or discarded this turn. Aaron, after your own heart.
Yeah, this was a card I think I predicted had some potential to it. This was a card that had all of the makings of being broken. And I seem to recall seeing it in flashes. I don't remember in what deck specifically, but I feel like people tried to make it work and it didn't really stick. But I'm with you. This is a card that I fully expect to see pop back up, a short time from now or even years from now, and somebody just having that aha moment of I've got it. There's something here.
One day,
all of the cards that, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was one day this is going to crack the code to some weird deck that just blows everybody out.
Yeah. All of the cards in Amonkhet that said whether you cycle or discard a card do something, they all have the potential to do something. I mean, Flameblade Adept found a home in Hollow 1, just kind of randomly. Archfiend of Ifnir and Drakehaven have seen play at various points in their existence. So, I think that it's possible that we see Shadow, and that one, especially for a combo style deck where you want to discard all your hand from a Diamond Lion, for example, maybe there's something there.
Yeah. And I think cycling is now an evergreen keyword, right? Like it's not linked to.
Well, it's a deciduous keyword.
There we
go. Bring it
Thank
back
you.
most of the time.
Yeah. So that opens up a lot of doors for, coming back and revisiting this card and going, okay, are these cycling cards going to make the difference? Is this card going to make a difference? And I think that's really cool.
Yeah. One day a cycling card's going to make mana for some reason. And it's going to be like, this is how you cycle them all back again. Oh, who knew?
They're going to like misprint a waist knot. And it's going to be like, it's going to be a problem.
Going to be a problem. Moving to number 9. Ruben, what's your number 9?
My number 9 is a cube all-star. Or sorry, no. My number 9 is actually higher on somebody else's list, so never mind.
Oh, but it's still a cube all-star. We'll just talk about it a little bit.
I had missed up my number 9 and my number 8, so save that cube all-star for my number 8. My number 9 is higher on somebody else's list.
Oh.
Your number 9 is higher, right?
My number 9 is higher, yes.
Got you. Cool. All right, so Aaron, what's your number 9?
So green historically has a problem with flyers, and we see that with cards like Plummet. We see that with the reach spiders that they're given, cards like Hurricane, board wipes that specifically target that target flying creatures. And this is a card that allows green to deal with flyers in a very fun, unique, expensive way. And this is a card that I just always have to laugh whenever I play because it's so silly and it's so over the top. My number 9 is Sandworm Convergence.
Yeah.
So Sandworm Convergence is 6 colorless and 2 green. It is an enchantment. Creatures with flying can't attack you or planeswalkers you control. And if that's not enough for you, it also is a win condition because at the beginning of your end step, you get a 5/5 green worm creature token. And my favorite story that I love to tell about this card is for a while there, Legacy Dredge was using this as a sideboard card against show and tell. So they would show and tell and you'd be like, oh, okay. And you'd slam a Sandworm Convergence. And the creatures that show and tell tends to play are Grizzlebrand and Emrakul, who have flying. And so you just run into this weird game. And I did get to land this once or twice and it felt amazing. And then you would just beat him to death with words. Yeah. And so you would never cast this, but it was just amazing and fun. It's about $2 now. It does see play in Commander and I love it.
Yeah. Sandworm Convergence was briefly toyed with in Enchantress kind of decks as well. My fondest memories of Sandworm Convergence are from Amonkhet Limited, which is famously one of the fastest, most aggressive limited formats of all time. And I did nothing but draft like Gift of Paradises and River Hoopus and was just like, Ruben, what are you doing? Why are you playing Spring to Mind in your limited deck when my opponents are playing like super aggro red 1-drops? It's like, because I want to play Approach of the Second Sons and Sandworm Convergences. And yeah, every time I opened one of these, I was like, yes, I have a finisher for my terrible deck.
This was an all-star in sealed though. This was like the A+ best card you could open in sealed. It wasn't quite as fast unless someone got an insane pool, but usually you could somehow hold off and just slam down that convergence, and they usually just conceded. Like,
if they don't have Forsake the Worldly randomly as a one-of in their as a 23rd card, you were pretty set.
I hope you have a Disenchant. That's what I'm saying. Well, for my number 9 here, this is a really cool card that has continued to see play, which is nice. I do feel like this would have been on my list anyway, even if we'd have made it at the time, because I can't get over the idea that you have a Planeswalker with sort of an ultimate that costs nothing. Gideon of the Trials is 2 white and generic mana for a mythic legendary planeswalker Gideon. It starts with 3 loyalty. It has a +1 until your next turn, prevent all damage target permanent would deal. 0: until end of turn. It becomes a 4/4 human soldier creature with indestructible that's still a planeswalker. Prevent all damage that would be dealt to him this turn. 0: you get an emblem with quote, as long as you control a Gideon planeswalker, you can't lose the game and your opponents can't win the game. So the idea of a control deck, control mirror, you'd have Gideon, they wouldn't. They just couldn't win the game. They'd have trouble getting rid of it. And so in the meantime, you turned it into a 4/4 that couldn't take damage and beat them to death with it. So high five. It was all good all around.
Yeah, this is a card that is still to this day seeing play. Particularly, I'm bringing it in as a sideboard card against this Tainted Pact Thassa's Oracle deck in Historic. Just to sit in play and be unable to like die unless they attack it usually.
Right.
Or if they draw their one of Shadows Verdict or whatever. It's a very powerful it's something that you can play on turn 3, not worry about it getting wrathed away, not worry about it being swept up with the rest of your aggressive creatures if you have a creature deck. It's something that is usually very difficult for a control deck to deal with on turn 3, not only because it is an emblem that prevents you from losing the game, but also it's aggressive. It can prevent your, Elder Gargaroth from dealing damage. It does a whole lot in a very small package, which is very nice.
Yeah, it's card sweet. Hasn't this thing seen legacy play? Am I wrong in that?
Occasionally, yeah. It combos well with effects like Pact of Negation. So you can, and other lose the game effects. So you can slam a Gideon of the Trials, make the emblem, and then other lose the game effects won't make you lose the game as long as it's in play. So you can sort of combo off of that as well.
Oh, that's awesome. I like that. All right, let's move on here to number 8. Aaron, what's number 8?
This was a card that I fell in love with the minute it was previewed. I'll never forget where I was. So when I used to go to work, remember going to the office? Remember the before times? We used to go to, my office building did not have a cafeteria or anything like that, but there was a really cool office site a couple blocks up that had a cafeteria. And so I remember walking up the street to go there, and I'm scrolling through the Amonkhet previews, and this card gets previewed, and I just freaked out. Like, I'm waiting in line at the salad bar, and I was just like, oh my God, I need this card in my life. I need a commander deck of this card. I need a playmat of this card. I loved everything about this character. And I did have a commander deck with this character until very recently. I just kind of fell out of love with it. But at the time, I was a super huge fan. And they also gave her quite a bit to do, particularly in the end of the Amonkhet story, which I really enjoyed. My number 8 is Hepatra, Vizier of Poisons. So Hepatra is 1 black and 1 green. She's a human cleric legendary creature with 2 power and 2 toughness. Whenever Hepatra deals combat damage to a player, you may put a -1/-1 counter on target creature. And then whenever you put 1 or more -1/-1 counters on a creature, you create a 1/1 green snake creature token with Death Touch. And I remember building this commander deck, and I like to have tokens. I like to be prepared when I play Magic. And I remember picking up 6. And I was like, someone's going to stop me. Like, they're not going to just let me do this, right? And there were so many games where I remember having to order more tokens from coolstuffinc.com. And I was like, okay, let's go up to 12. 12 is going to be fine, right? And then I'd play another game where, nope, I'm just going ham here. And all of a sudden it's like, okay, we'll pick up 6 more. And I just remember by the end, I had about 24 tokens because these games did just sort of get out of control. You would play your Carnifex Demon, you would play Black Sun Zenith, and before you know it, snakes everywhere.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
I love so I've realized something about Commander that took me a long time. From playing competitive Magic, I've always wanted to play my Commander and be able to protect it immediately, right? There's nothing really that feels worse than slamming down your Commander and then it immediately dying, and now it just costs 2 more and you got no value out of it.
Right.
So I'm always terrified of, Swords to Plowshares, terror effects, and what I've realized is nobody gives a crap about what I'm doing. Everyone is sort of in their own world for the first several turns. So I can slam my, my Arcades on turn 3 or turn 4, and no one's going to touch it, most of the time. And that's the danger of cheap build around me commanders like Hepatra is, I'd be terrified of a Lightning Strike. Nobody plays Lightning Strike on turn 2. I mean, they could be doing what they want to be doing, right?
Yeah,
right?
I would rather be ramping. I would rather be playing a Mana Geode, or who cares, right? I'd rather be getting to my game plan. You go over there with your snakes and your -1/-1 counters. But turns out, since your plan is so much earlier on the board, and it generates its own kind of card advantage with those tokens, you can just go ham, and it's great.
Hepatra.
I certainly miss that about in Brawl. What you're describing, what happens, which is I play my Arcades and it dies. I play my Arcades again and it died. Because you run spot removal in that format, whereas in Commander they generally has a lot of brass and whatever sweepers, but there's never just boom, get rid of that guy. Just boom.
There's much less of that.
Right. And so it's unfortunate, but that's just kind of how that format works. Yeah. All right, Ruben, what's your number 8?
My number 8 is a Cube All-Star.
Hey!
Remember how I was talking about that a minute ago? This card did not see a ton of competitive play. It did, occasionally in blue-black control decks and Sultai decks. It saw a little bit as a top-end finisher. Very good value on a Planeswalker. Also an iconic character with spectacular art by Chris Rallis. Liliana, Death's Mastery is my number 8. Mm-hmm. Liliana Death's Mastery is 3 colorless black for legendary planeswalker Liliana with loyalty of 5. She is a mythic. Go ahead and put up the San Diego Comic-Con 2017 art for this, by the way, because I don't know if we'll see any more of those, but this is the hieroglyphic version. Plus cool. 1, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token, mill 2 cards. That's the new wording. -3, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. That creature is a black zombie in addition to its other colors and types. And -7, destroy all non-zombie creatures. So 5 mana, get a thing back and maintain value. That's a Beacon of Unrest, and you still just have a creature in play. Much less, you get to go up to 6 loyalty, make a blocker, and add more things to your graveyard, which you probably want to do anyway. And oh, by the way, there's a Wrath built in if you really, really need it. And usually it's a one-sided Wrath for Liliana.
Yeah, I love everything about this, and the thing in particular that gets me is the art. So the first thing I notice when I look at this card is the dress. Like, I can hear this dress. Like, when someone's like shuffling their dress around, I can hear that. I can feel that fabric, like the way that the fabric is wrinkled and creased, like that is so realistic. But I love the zombie servants. The fact that there is one zombie holding her fruit bowl up. You have another zombie fanning her. You have another zombie bowing down to her. I love that. Like, this is just one of those pieces of art that I just can keep picking details out of. The fact that her arm is not even resting bare on the arm, but there's a cushion under that elbow. Like, it's not just on the table. It's, I need a pillow for this. Like, there's just so many layers to this. There's the attitude of it all. The fact that, she's got the single grape right there that she's just sort of glaring at you. You have the beautiful sky behind her with the pyramids. I mean, this artwork is just amazing.
Wow. Yeah, they really crushed it in this one. And this was sort of the era of, I feel like Wizards liked making 5 mana planeswalkers, They were good. They were never crazy overpowered, but they were good when you want them to be good. And when you're in limited formats like the Cube, this is an amazing, obviously planeswalkers are great and limited, but this one in particular was pretty crushing when you just started making your own little army and destroyed everything, because it's really hard to get to her when she makes her own army.
It is really tough to make a 5 mana planeswalker that is too good. And this is like everything you want really in a planeswalker, except for draw a card. But putting it into play is better than drawing it usually. And so, I think that this is pretty much peak 5 mana planeswalker.
Yeah, I think there's only one beyond it would probably be Nissa Shakes the World or whatever, because that card's busted. Sure. But beyond that, 5 mana planeswalkers go completely nuts, whatever. Yeah,
Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, and Nissas don't come along too often.
Mm-hmm. Now, this is, for my number 8, this is a nice example of a card that I'm pretty sure I wouldn't have had on my list 4 years ago, or 5 years ago, whatever it was. And the idea that what this card does now is so interesting and exciting in Historic, a format that didn't even exist, was a twinkle in the eye of a Microsoft executive many, many years ago. Lets me show how much I've sort of come to grow, to appreciate and to like, and to see what happens in the Neostorm deck when you slam down Combat Celebrant, give it haste, and kill your opponent with it. Combat Celebrant is the mythic that could. It finally got there. I'm telling you, this card was trash for many years. But Combat Celebrant is a red and 2 generic mana for a 4/1 mythic human warrior. If it hasn't been exerted this turn, you may exert it as it attacks. When you do, untap all other creatures you control, and after this phase, there's an additional combat phase. An exerted creature won't untap during your next untap step. So, yeah, this gives you that extra combat phase to make sure that after you Neostorm and you're dueling, or like dual cast mage or whatever, you copy the thing over and over, and finally you're like, okay, give it haste with the battlement and smash, and that's how you win the game. And this card's awesome.
Yeah. Usually, you go get your Rubble Fort battlements to give everything haste, and this allows you to beat decks that have gained 8 life or whatever,
or have some blockers or whatever, or
have a few blockers. Exactly. This deck this card did briefly see a little bit of play in the blue-red God Pharaoh's Gift decks. Just a little bit of play, because when you God Pharaoh's Gift this after dumping everything into your graveyard with Minister of Inquiries, you get an extra attack phase, which is always nice.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. So this is a weird card, a 4/1 mythic human, but it comes
for 3. You don't usually get Craven Giant stats on a creature. They don't give us 4/1s all the time. So this was interesting. It was very fragile, obviously. It's a glass cannon style card, so of course it would end up in Neo form.
All right. Let's move on here to number 7. Ruben, what's your number 7?
My number 7 is a card that we actually got to preview. Kind of. We were supposed to preview this card as part of the Magic Mike's podcast. You may have heard of us. And this card is one of the cards that we actually got sniped. It got spoiled before.
I think it was our first time.
It was our first time getting sniped.
We've been pretty lucky, yeah.
But fortunately, Wizards took pity upon us and said, we're sorry your preview card got taken, especially because it's a legendary creature god. Here's a bunch of other stuff, including the invocation version or the hieroglyphic version of Ronas, the Indomitable. Ronas is 2 colorless and a green for a 5/5 with Death Touch and Indestructible.
Oof.
That's a lot of stats. But it can't attack or block unless you have another creature with power 4 or greater. So you need to kind of turn it on. Fortunately, it turns itself on. 2 colorless and a green, and I do too. Another target creature gets +2/+0 and gains trample until the end of the turn. So you only need to have a 2/2 in play or a 2/1 in play to really make this thing work, and then get in there with a 5/5. Very cheap. It's super useful in older formats when you can play super cheap things like Lovestruck Beast and Kazandu Mammoth. In Standard, this thing was best friends with Electrostatic Pummeler and a bunch of the aggro creatures that were available in red-green monsters, and Stompy combos really well with Titania in Commander. Just a very excellent card.
Yeah, cards fetches about $10 to $15 in Commander. And, the nice thing about all of the gods was that they had a way to kind of turn themselves on. So, it wasn't difficult to get this going. And, green loves their cheap creatures and their mana sinks. And so, and also this card, I can't help but think of the death scene. They actually show, Ronas being killed on a card. And then you also get to see Ronas just being dead. So, pour one out for Ronas, everybody. And I think it's funny you call it Ronas. I always say Ronas. So,
but I'm trying to go with the more Egyptian flavor where they have the longer sound.
Did I ever tell you about the time that I love to think of like magic versions of popular songs, and Ronas inspired me to do an Amonkhet version of Proud Mary. I'll have to do it for you sometime. So.
Oh wow.
Well, there's no time like the present.
On the river.
There you go. Ronas.
Because around here, he's known as Ronas. Ronas, where you at now? Ronas?
Ronas.
Got you a case of the Ronas now. And this card is like reasonable in one way and unreasonable in the second. The first way is at least it doesn't have trample, and the unreasonable is that it gives the guy trample and it pumps
the other creatures trample.
Yes,
it's a lot.
Insane. It's very good, very powerful. Got a nice example of like how R&D struggles to deal with indestructible creatures in Standard, and why they don't want to make them indestructible because of like the weird workarounds for a card like this. It was crazy. Aaron, what's your number 7?
So my number 7 is going to be a cycle. I'm going to cheat a little bit here. And these are cards that I don't recall seeing a lot of play in Standard, but I love them in Commander. I actually asked a question on Twitter the other day about whether or not people considered cost reduction cards to be ramp. And I got a lot of really nice responses to this. But if I'm ever playing something like in a monocolored deck, I absolutely try to make sure I include the monuments. And so my number 7 is that whole cycle. And so there's monuments named after each god, including Ronas. My favorite monument that I'm going to talk about is Bantu's Monument, which goes for about $3 right now, which is not bad. And so Bantu's Monument is 3 colorless. It's a legendary artifact. Black creature spells you cast cost 1 colorless less to cast. And whenever you cast a creature spell, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So obviously this is great in my She-Ray deck, which is 90% creatures. And so, all my creatures cost less to cast. There is this sort of drain ability, which affects all opponents, which is nice, particularly in Commander. And so, blue, I believe it's like you can kind of tap down creatures with a freeze effect. Red gives you this sort of draw discard effect. And so I love these. I think they're a little bit underplayed. And I think people are kind of picking up on them because they have been slowly kind of creeping up in price there. And I just love them.
Yep. This and Oketra's Monument are both up around $3 because they're just, it's a drain effect, and then it adds a bunch of stuff to the board. I briefly remember playing a White Mane Lion Oketra's Monument deck in Modern for about half a second.
Yep.
Because pay 1 white mana, get a thing at instant speed. Pay 4 white mana, get 4 things. I mean, it was fun.
Yeah.
It wasn't great, but it was fun.
It's fun to me to see Oketra's Monument foil $4.50, Bantu's Monument foil $13. So
yeah, I think Bantu's is the best out of the cycle, but I think they're all quite, like, I have considered them at various points in my deck building. Like, obviously I have Oketra in my God Eternal Oketra deck because you're just sort of counting your triggers at that point, where it's like you cast a creature, here's your 4/4, here's your 1/1, you'll take it. And then obviously if you're playing a Ronas deck or you're playing mono green, sure, let's give things trample, that's fine. You're rewarded for just really playing Magic, which I love.
Yeah, the
Oketra one is particularly good because you can Oketra herself costs 5, so the reduction on turn 3 lets you play the Oketra on turn 4.
Yeah,
nice. Well, for my number 7 here, this was one of the kind of split cards-ish, kind of, sort of. They did the Aftermath thing. Which, like, they wanted you to, like, turn it sideways and, like, stick it out of your graveyard or something, and that was always kind of weird for me, but whatever. Could just use Flashback like normal people. Well, it's whatever. But this card in particular was always, like, I can't believe it does what it does for 3 mana. I'm like, you can double damage this turn for 3 mana? Insult to Injury ends games, ladies and gentlemen. Let me tell you, Insult is a red and 2 generic mana for a rare sorcery that says damage can't be prevented this turn. If a source you control would deal damage this turn, it deals double that damage instead. That card is bananas. Injury, which is a sorcery, like rank my head here, it is a red and 2 generic mana sorcery that is an Aftermath, meaning you can cast this spell only from your graveyard, then exile it. It deals 2 damage to target creature and 2 damage to target player. So if you're doubling your damage, it would deal 4 and then 4 if you are able to pay the full 6. And if not, you just paid 3 and ran them over. It's awesome.
One of my most indelible memories of Grand Prix, just me dying to random things, is I was playing that Nexus of Fate Fog deck, and I played a Teferi, and I untapped 2 lands, and I cast like Haze of Pollen or something, and my opponent was like, Insult. I was like, well, that's a way to lose game 1. And also, I'm on the Fog side, and my opponent's on the red side, so I'm like kind of cheering for them to win. You know what I mean? But I'm like, that's a one of in the main deck that I deserve if I'm playing a Nexus of Fate deck.
Yeah, it's weird because it wasn't like a playset in the red deck or nothing, you know?
Right.
It's right there when you need it, and it's unbelievably annoying.
It's unbelievable when you have it.
It really is. It's a blowout. All right, let's move on here to number 6. Ruben, what's your number 6?
My number 6 is the second of 4 hires on my list.
Wow, that's a bunch of hires, first of all.
It is.
But I also know that of all the cards in all the set, at random number 6, I love it when it's not a number 1. It's random number 6. Aaron and I thought exactly the same amount of importance to this one card, which happens to be the most expensive card in the set. But that's fine. That's because it's in a Commander All-Star, not necessarily with awesome standard card.
This is my number 9.
Oh, very nice. Aaron, tell us what our number 6 is.
I mean, our number 6 is Anointed Procession. 3 colorless and a white. It's an enchantment. If an effect would create 1 or more tokens under your control, it creates twice that many of those tokens instead. This goes for about $40 right now. I think Sam Black had a little bit of fun with it in Standard, as he's wont to do, but this is really just a commander card. You know, as we've seen before, doubling effects, obviously doubling season parallel lives. They've always been very expensive staples in Commander, and white is no stranger to being able to make tokens as well. And so this is pretty much just an auto include. If you're doing anything with tokens, you want to be doing this. And it's tokens. It doesn't necessarily have to be creatures, but clue tokens, treasure tokens. I mean, these are all things that can be double thanks to this card, and it's just obnoxious.
I didn't think about the clues, the treasures. That's really sweet.
If the word doubled appears on a Magic card, get as many as you can and put them in a shoebox because they will all be worth $50.
Throw them in your closet.
Every single one of the double effects, double your counters, double your tokens, double your mana, everything always hits in Commander. And Anointed Procession is no different. Having access to, you know, a Parallel Lives or whatever, this was designed to work well with Embalm. But of course, you know, there are much better token generators in Commander, and Anointed Procession needs a reprint badly, apparently.
Lord God.
It's only been printed the one time, 5 years ago, and it's just going to keep going up until they put it in Modern Horizons 2, question mark?
Or just another Commander set, for God's sakes. Like, do what they did to Hellkite Tyrant. Hellkite Tyrant was about $30, and they slipped it in the Lorehold deck. Like, yes, that's fantastic.
Good. Let's do more of that. I mean, it's a cool card. I dig it.
Right. Commander, what was the Commander Collection green? If this goes, this could very easily go in Commander Collection white alongside the archaeological map or whatever.
Yeah, and Smothering Tithe and all that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and this is like those 4 mana white enchantments that are amazing in that format. And that's awesome. I cannot believe this card was $40-something.
I couldn't either. I looked at the prices and was like, "How in the world?"
I've watched it, yeah, and it's funny because I first noticed it at 20, and I was like, "Ew," and then I watched it go to 30, and I just waved goodbye. It was just like, "Oh, this is not happening in my lifetime." Okay.
Of all the cards in the set, that's a number 6. That's what I'm talking about. Let's move on here to number 5. Ruben, what's number 5?
All right, it's time to talk about zombies, everybody, because Amonkhet had good zombies in it.
Yes, they did.
And Liliana made zombies, but Liliana didn't win a Pro Tour with zombies. Liliana was referenced in the Pro Tour winning deck with zombies. Sure, that was nice, but it wasn't the card that like really capitalized on zombies. And I put a couple of the I only put one of the actual zombies on my list. You know, I could talk here about Lord of the Accursed, which was an excellent lord for the deck. I could talk about a number of the other creatures, but really I want to talk about Dread Wanderer for a number of reasons. And I'll tell you what Dread Wanderer does first. Dread Wanderer is a 1 black mana zombie jackal, which is kind of why I wanted to talk about it. It's a 2/1 that enters the battlefield tapped. Pay 2 colorless and a black, return Dread Wanderer from your graveyard to the battlefield, activate only as a sorcery and only if you have 1 or fewer cards in your hand. So we've seen a number of this kind of effect where it's a 2/1 that enters tapped and can come back from the graveyard for some amount of mana. Most of those return to your hand. Right? Gutter Bones is a good example of this. Sanitarium Skeleton is another in the same vein. This one goes back onto the battlefield, which is a huge deal. Being able to not get countered on the way back down, not be dealt, or get out of your hand on the way back down. Being able to come directly back into play. And Zombies was a deck that wanted to empty its hand very quickly. It had things like Crypt Breaker to get things out of its hand. And Dread Wanderer was just early pressure. It was the second 1-drop in the deck. And it was very, very good.
Yeah, this was like it has the stats to move essentially, right? It's 1 mana, it's 2 power, it has the ability to recur itself, it has the ability to block, which is often very, very huge. A lot of these can never block. So all of those things together means that whenever you're building like a black aggro deck these days in historic or maybe modern, like you're going to look at Dread Wanderer a lot. Say, well, maybe that's what I want.
And it's good to discard as well.
Yeah, and they give us variations on this, and sometimes some are more successful than others. But yeah, this was definitely the 1-drop. And we've said before, tribal decks really live and die by their 1-drops, where you need to have a really good 1-drop. And, I think that was the thing that was missing for a while there, was like we had pieces of it, and then this was there, and I think we still had Crypt Breaker for a time. And so it was really between those two that was like, okay, we're in, and off to the races.
And this is what won Jerry Thompson the Pro Tour, was mono black zombies. Which,
that's awesome.
I mean, if you tell 12-year-old Ruben that a zombies deck wins a Pro Tour, I would have been like, what's a Pro Tour? But if you told 14-year-old Ruben that zombies win a Pro Tour, I would have been like, that's awesome. That's what I want.
Fantastic. All right, let's move on here to Aaron's number 5. What you got?
Number 5 is one of 2 hires on my list.
Well, okay then. I guess I'll pull the last weight for number 5. This is a card that continues to see play in Historic. I think in Modern, I don't know because I don't play Modern, but I play a lot of Historic and I see the stupid card because it catches me all the time. And I liked what Wizards did, particularly with cycling in Amonkhet. Amonkhet finally had cycling come back, and then a whole bunch of cycling cares cards and whatever. That's fine. But what they also introduced, if I recall correctly, this was the first time they ever had 1 mana cycling cards in Magic was Amonkhet. They later did it for like Ikoria, but whatever. Because when people saw Censor, they were like, holy cow, this card's amazing. Like, it's not quite, the Mana Tithe 4th Spike, and it's not quite the Mana Leak or whatever you want. And if you don't want it, you just pay a blue mana and you're rid of and draw a card. It's fine. Censor is blue and a generic mana for a uncommon instant that says counter target spell unless its controller pays 1 generic mana. It has cycling of a blue. So blue, discard this card, draw a card, bam. That's all you got to do. It's Ripper and ready to go. It's fantastic in control decks. It's late in the game, you're just going to cycle it. Early in the game, you're going to catch somebody and it's going to feel great. And it still does. To this day, I've been censored.
Oh, sure. It's highly played in historic for sure. Not the first time that we've had one color of mana for cycling. We've had like the rune cycle and a bunch of stuff in like onslaught and stuff. But
okay, well I was wrong there.
But Amonkhet was the first time I feel like they did it correctly. A lot of the cards had cycling and you never wanted to cycle them, right? Or they had cycling and you never wanted to use the actual card. This was, like Censor, is a perfect example of it's very useful in very specific circumstances, and then you just get rid of it the rest of the time. There were a bunch of cards that were like, all right, this is very good on exactly turn 4, right? But you want to cycle it every other time that it's in your hand, or it's very good against a very specific type of deck, but then you want to cycle it the rest of the time. And they were just very good at where to use cycling in Amonkhet.
Did they have, and then now that you mentioned that on Onslaught, I'm like, duh, the land cycle. But like, did they have colored mana cyclers anywhere other than the lands? Is that what was different?
Huh. Sure, they had Backslide.
Okay, well, that was just
there
me.
were a couple of other ones, and then there was like Rune of Protection White in Urza's Saga. I think could cycle for a white mana, for example.
Nice.
But I mean, and Hieroglyphic Illumination is another good example of this from Amonkhet,
right?
Where you don't, or I think it's from Amonkhet.
I think so, yeah.
Where you want to, sometimes you want to just cycle it for the 1 so that you can get your miracle trigger or whatever, and then sometimes you want to cast it for the extra card.
And guess which era of Magic I did not play in, which was the Urza's to Onslaught.
Yeah.
There you go.
They're easy to forget. A lot of those weren't very good because they didn't put them on the right effects, right? So you put them on, just decent creatures and you're not going to ever see it get cycled, so you just forget about them.
Right. Fair enough. All right. So that is our number 5. Let's move here to number 4. Ruben, what's number 4?
My third of 4 hires is my number 4.
Aaron, what's number 4?
One of the things I love about Magic is the fact that a seemingly random common or uncommon can be printed and can either create a new archetype or breathe new life into an existing archetype. And that was clearly the case here with my number 4, which is Vizier of Remedies. So Vizier of Remedies was 1 colorless and a white. It's a human cleric with 2 power and 1 toughness. If 1 or more -1/-1 counters would be put on a creature you control, that many -1/-1 counters -1 are put on it instead. And so this ended up pairing very well with, I think it's Devoted Druid.
Yeah.
And this basically turned into an infinite combo. That's a mana dork that you could tap, and you can gain, I think, a colorless mana. And then you have to untap it and put a -1/-1 counter on it. And so if you're not putting counters on it, you can just whoop, 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 whoop. And then this spawned a new archetype with elves. We saw a green-white elves deck in Modern for a little while. And I think people are still doing dumb things with like Finale of Devastation now. And so this little card that nobody really played with in Standard at the time, where you would think you'd want this. Oh no, the Modern girls were like, we got you. And lo and behold.
pretty much replaced Melira in those Collected Company or Podless Pod decks. It combos with Devoted Druid for infinite green. It combos with Kitchen Finks for infinite life alongside Vizier, and it also comboed with Duskwatch Recruiter to use that mana to search your library for an infinitely large walking ballista. And yeah, so it was it kind of came out of nowhere. I don't think that people really expected this to do what it did, and then Modern was just like, oh, we got this.
And you're right, Devoted Druid does make a green. I'm sorry about that.
It's all right. But yeah, I mean, those effects, especially Devoted Druid, we're just waiting for more things to break them. And also the way Vizier of Remedies is worded has always been funny to me.
It's weird to me to have one card, a singular individual card that kind of negates the entire mechanic of Persist. Like, the whole thing just doesn't work anymore while you have Vizier of Remedies. So any trigger whatsoever for Persist is amazing.
And God bless. Yeah. And there is just, I've said it before, there is a small, God bless them, there is a community out there that wants nothing more to do than win the game with a Kitchen Finks and a +1/+1 counter. Like, that is what they are here for, and that they will look for any reason, whether it be Anafenza, remember the mono white Anafenza? If it's this, that's just what they're here to do.
Okay.
Melira. It was Juniper Order Ranger for a second.
Oh my god.
Yeah, I mean, anything that you can do to take advantage of Rule 702.1b or whatever.
Yeah, but Juniper Order Ranger was like 5 mana.
Right? I'm super excited if I got that rule right.
I would be excited if you did too. For my number 4 here, this is a card, again, that I get to see a lot, so I think about it a lot. And I'm like, oh, wow, this is actually turned to be incredibly important. Also a card I don't think I would have given that much credence to if I had a list for 4 or 5 years ago. But it doesn't matter, because these days I love casting both halves of Commit to Memory.
Yes.
This is my number 6.
Nice. So, Commit to Memory is a blue and 3 generic mana for a rare instant that says put target spell or non-land permanent into its owner's library second from the top. And note that's spell or non-land permanent, so while something's on the stack, get out of here. Memory, Moving Head, is 2 blue and 4 generic mana for a sorcery that has Aftermath, meaning you can cast it from your graveyard, then exile it. Each player shuffles their hand and graveyard into their library and then draws 7 cards. That's an awesome ability, and I love this card, and it's great.
Being able to reset your hand when you've got a million lands in play is always very good. This one also won a Pro Tour. Greg Orange had it in his blue-white control deck for the Pro Tour 25th anniversary. The Team Pro Tour had a one of, just to recycle everything. One of my favorite cards in the Arena Cube. It's just an extremely potent effect. I mean, they're just all the types of things you want to put second from the top, and the two halves kind of combo with each other too, because if there's something that's really bothering you that you can't get rid of, like a God Eternal Kefnet or whatever, and you can shuffle it away, here you go.
That gives you a shuffle effect. And these days, it's also played generally as a one of. And by the way, thank you, because rare wild cards are really difficult to get in Arena, and it was annoying. Like it hurt to craft this one, because I was like, I'm only going to play it in that one deck. And, it's fine. I need it. It's cool. It's a very good card. We'll take it. Move on here to number 3 that includes my only hire is my number 3. Ruben, what's your number 3?
We're back to zombies, and now we've got a zombie lord, sort of, and it is a zombie lord that you can't wrath away. My number 3 is Liliana's Mastery.
Yes.
Liliana's Mastery is 3 colorless black for an enchantment. Zombies you control get +1/+1, and when Liliana's Mastery enters the battlefield, create 2 black zombie creature tokens. Extremely potent card. The Game Night promo where they added the line between the text and the flavor text is my favorite version. Because I just like that the cute little line that separates it.
It's nice.
And the flavor text really tells you a lot of the flavor of what happened in Amonkhet, which is, they were making this army of zombies, and Liliana shows up and it's like, ooh, free real estate, and just starts taking them for herself.
Well, she established that even early on. Like the plane itself had this weird relationship with death, and that things never really stayed dead. Like they called that the curse of wandering. And so, even when she first got there, she was like, my magic works differently here, which then led to, there's all these zombies running around, and that's sort of what she does. And so it was just kind of a match made in heaven. But yeah, if I remember correctly, this was the top end for the zombies deck, because you would do all of those things. And then, here's technically 3/3 zombies for 5 mana. Like, this is fine. Like
5 mana, 6 power, 6 toughness, 2 creatures. This card was amazing.
And everything
limited.
you play for the rest of the game is bigger.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It was super sweet. And then, just from a story, standpoint, Liliana gets here and she's like, they're all dead. This is great. Let's go. Come on.
Yeah,
that was fantastic. All right. Aaron, what's number 3?
So my number 3, we mentioned earlier cycling, and that cycling is one of those mechanics that, certain people will always look back on and say, is this good enough for this deck? And I was a Living End player. My first modern deck was Living End. And so, when I see a cycling deck, my little ears go up like Scooby, like, is this good enough for Living End? And a lot of times it's not. But in particular, this card was. And so Living End has made a bit of a comeback lately in Modern. And this card is prominently featured there. My number 3 is Curator of Mysteries. So Curator of Mysteries is 2 colorless and 2 blue. It's a Sphinx with 4 power and 4 toughness. You're probably not paying 4 for it. It's fine. It has flying, and whenever you cycle or discard another card, which does become relevant in Living End, you can scry 1, and it does come with cycling of 1 blue. So, being able to give Living End creatures with evasion specifically is really, really cool. If you have one of these out, the cycling and discard does become relevant. And so this was just the card that, Living End has needed. It has moved on to more of a teamer version almost, whereas before it used to be very Jund and maybe 4 color, but they really didn't touch blue before. And now they're very all in on blue thanks to this and other cyclers as well. And so it just feels good to just be able to look back and say, is this good enough? Is this good enough? It's good enough.
Doggone it.
They've been willing to give us 4 mana, 4/4 flyers in blue recently, and I love it. They're pretty much they're usually good, and they're usually Sphinxes. And this one is no different.
You think so?
Is it a Sphinx?
You think so?
You Sphinx so?
You Sphinx so? I Sphinx so.
Are you Sphinxing so?
I
Sphinx so. This card is great though. This was one of those, I think, just lessening just a little bit in terms of like it can be 4 mana, 4/4 flyer with plenty of upsides, with lots of different ways to use it from there, and that's okay. And it didn't take over anything, and it was okay. It was fine. All right, let's move on here to number 2. Ruben, what's number 2?
Last higher. Someone else has this at number 1. And
my
I'm
number 2 is
excited.
also higher.
Ooh.
My last higher, yep.
Well, I guess I'm pulling the number 2 train here. I'll buy my lonesome. Goodness, this card is amazing. So I'm guessing this is probably in Aaron's list number 5, maybe Ruben's number 4. I don't know. All I know was this dude, bro, right here, he ran the format. Just put it on his back and said, let's go. Everything had to pass this test. Everything had to say, can you get through this guy? Everything said, you have something that could kill this thing. Can you stop a glorybringer? This
is my number 4.
Nice. And Aaron, was this on your list at all?
It was not, but this card has seen new life in what I lovingly call red-green trade binder in Modern. Mm-hmm. It's like a Ponza deck that has Clothis. They love Glorybringer, like Modern play.
Historic too.
Oh, yeah. Historic is also there. I've got mine crafted. Glorybringer is 2 red and 3 generic mana for a 4/4 rare dragon. It has flying and haste, so a 5 mana 4/4 flying haster. And you may exert it, of course, as it attacks. And when you do, it deals 4 damage to target non-dragon creature an opponent controls. And that's amazing.
I remember seeing
excellent exert card.
Mm-hmm.
I remember seeing heated discussions about this on Twitter of whether or not this was ban worthy. Like there were people that thought this card was oppressive.
Yeah, that's a little silly, but like no joke. This you had to pass the Glorybringer test in some way or fashion. You just had to.
This is one of the reasons why, for example, Curator of Mysteries didn't see a ton of plays because it didn't pass the Glorybringer test. It didn't have a come into play ability, but it had essentially a comes into it had a haste do a thing ability. You could immediately take down the one of the biggest things on your opponent's side of the board, whatever they've embalmed or eternalized. This card was huge. If it's a 4/4 for 5 in red that's a dragon with flying and haste, it's gonna be good.
It's probably gonna be
like they've given us about 1 a year, not every set, about 1 a year, maybe 2 a year, and they're almost all universally good.
Yeah, I mean, we went with Thundermaw Hellkite into Storm Breath Dragon into what was after that?
It might have been Glorybringer, or no, the Thundermaw Hellkite. No, that's one deal the 1 damage to everything.
Well, now we have Goldspan Dragon.
Right. Yeah, it's a trend. Also amazing.
And we have, and you said Storm Breath already. I mean, we don't have a ton of them, and they're all mythic. Most of them are mythic.
Most are mythic.
And they're all great. And I love it that they give us these aggressive, powerful dragons.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And it was just terrific card. This is an all-star limited. This was like the number 1 limited card. You just could not hardly lose if you resolved a Glorybringer. You'd have to be so far behind that even a Glorybringer can't help you. You're losing that game. I can't tell you. Card is fantastic. Let's move on here to our number 1. Ruben, what's number 1?
My number 1 is, I think everybody should know what my number 1 is. It won 2 Pro Tours in red decks. It was the reason to play red decks for a long time. It then won Worlds in a Rakdos aggro deck in the hands of Javier Dominguez, and was the top end of that deck as well, alongside Glorybringer. It is the reason for the season to be playing red, and oh, by the way, the Invocation version we had a lot of fun with. My number 1 is Hazaret the Pervert, better known as Hazaret the Fervent.
Nice. You was your number 5, you said?
Yeah.
3 colorless and red for legendary creature God. 5/4 indestructible haste. Taste it. Can't attack or block unless you have 1 or fewer cards in your hand. Who has cards in their hand in this economy? Get out of here. But if you happen to, you can always pay 2 colorless, a red, and discard a card to deal 2 damage to each opponent. Indestructible haste turn 4 for so good. You just never able to deal with this card if you're a control deck. I mean, you better have multiple cast outs to be able to deal with this and all the other aggressive garbage that I have. And oh, by the way, if you have an army of tokens that are sitting there to chump block this, I'll just discard a card from my hand every turn and you'll die eventually.
I feel like you and I, have you seen the handshake meme where it has the 2 arms? I feel like it's like graveyard players, red players, we both don't want cards in our hand. And the thing I love most about this card is not only, it showed up in multiple formats. The mono red prison decks in Legacy loved this card because you could sort of ditch all the dead Trinispheres you had or the extra chalices you had. And then you just had a 5/4 that your opponent who was already, being restricted might not be able to deal with. This also saw play in Affinity. Remember Affinity in Modern? Oh yeah, you would play this because Affinity would famously sneeze out its hand. And then they would play this in Experimental Frenzy with the red twist and just do its thing. And so I loved seeing all the weird places this card came up. But, I love this card. I've said before, I don't necessarily have an issue with red, but I'm really over kind of the burn, stop hitting yourself kind of style of red. And this to me is a really cool take on red. And so I really like this. I think she was the god that saw the most constructed play. Like, I don't think the others saw it to the level that she did. And that actually works out really well because she's the last surviving god, aside from the Scarab god and the Locust god, who may not count. But of the original 5, she's still kicking on Amonkhet. And so God bless her.
Still hanging out. I will never forget hanging out there. Remember, again, the before times when we had an office and we were just hanging out talking about magic, and somebody said, I can't not see this and not see Hazaret the pervert. And I was like, what? I was like, oh my God. And I made the tweet. Like, I can remember a time of the tweet going, man, I wonder if anybody else gets this. It was like one of my number one most retweeted things ever. No one just thought it was hilarious. And Wizards couldn't comment on it, but I felt like they knew.
What an icon.
Awkward and hilarious and silly. All right. Aaron, what's number 1?
My number 1 is a card I have raved about before. I don't always play Standard. I need a really, really good reason to play Standard. And I can't even do this. I love it so much. And, when I first saw this card, it just had the right amount of interaction for me, which is none. And I had so much fun playing this. And they even put this, which is none. And they even made it one of the Standard precons, because this was the first batch of the Standard pre-constructed decks that you could literally just pick up, go to F&M and play it. And I did. And I played it all the way until rotation happened, and now it's a win con in at least one of my commander decks. My number 1 is Approach of the Second Sun.
Nice.
So Approach of the Second Sun is 6 colorless and a white. It's a sorcery. If Approach was cast from your hand and you've cast another spell named Approach this game, you win the game. Otherwise, you put Approach into its owner's library 7th from the top, and you gain 7 life. And so you would play this blue-white, bore you to tears style of control with Search for Azcanta, Censor, Cast Out, things like that. And then you would just win the game with this. And more often than not, people would often scoop on the first one, which was hilarious. And then you would play this fun sub game of you ran no creatures. So you would board out your approaches. You would board in Regal Caracal, which was also an Amonkhet, and you'd beat him to death with cats. And so the deck was just amazing and fun. It's now a win condition in my Marchesa deck because you're building this enchantment pillow fort and then you just approach. And so I love this card so much. It's so flavorful with the 2 sons of Amonkhet, and the second son lining up perfectly with the horns and foretelling Bolas's return. And I just have so many fond memories of this card and just the lulls of people getting frustrated and scared.
Yeah. I want to briefly talk about the Mystical Archive versions. First, the English one with artist Mintu Hininen. She is an artist who has only done Mystical Archive cards, but has done a bunch of them. From this to the new Grape Shot to the new Fracturing Gust that's in the Secret Lair.
Right.
Go take a look at her art style.
Even the Japanese version.
And the Japanese version is also spectacular from artist Nagano.
Yeah, they are absolutely fantastic. And I have lost to this card in Limited in Strixhaven multiple times.
Yeah, of course. And I used to, again, with my Bore You to Tears, 5-color mix-up Amonkhet Limited decks, I would always first pick an Approach of the Second Son and be like, all right, time to just
Dirtle.
Pick his Dirtle as much as I possibly can, and then gain 7 life with losing a card from my hand. Right. Mm-hmm. But, this along with Search for Azcanta and Azcanta the Sunken Ruin, being able to dig deeper for it.
Right.
Also, Narset has given this additional life because you're able to dig faster into your approaches. This is, Approach of the Second Son is kind of a perfect Magic card.
It's a wonderful Magic card, and the ability to just kind of demonstrate to someone that, not all Magic has to be smashy, creature. You'd be like, look at how you could build a deck that makes this work. That's what this card is really cool for, in my opinion. It's it makes your mind work of, how could I make this work? And then you go, that wasn't working in Limited, and then I lost to it.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, among alternate win conditions, I've probably lost to Approach of the Second Son the most.
Yeah,
fair.
I love it.
Yeah.
And the fun mini game of they get rid of the wrong one, because the first one you can counter. It's the second. Yeah. So the first one I think doesn't matter. It's the second one you have to, right?
So the first one gains you 7 life and buries it 7 cards deep.
Right.
The second one wins you.
Right. And so you get people sometimes that would just get trigger happy and they'd be like, counter! And then you'd have 3 more in your deck and you just be like, that's nice.
Who cares? Yeah.
Yeah, at that point, it's whatever, I'll draw another one at some point. Right.
You countered my gain 7 life spell. Ooh.
Or it's even better when you would do the berry thing, so you'd put it 7 down, and then there'd be another one like in the 7, and you're like, whoop! Because it doesn't have to be that same one, it just...
Right. Or you cast it, and then you cast memory and draw it a turn early. Yeah.
Ridiculous. Well, look, my number 1, I think my process of elimination is both of y'all's number 2. Mm-hmm. Which is
it's been my number 1 on multiple lists, I think.
That's fair. And and I think at the time, this is a really good example of at the time, I feel like you and I would have slammed Hazaret the Fervent. I'm not even sure I would have put this on a list, quite frankly, at the time.
Not.
Because no one really said much about Soulscar Mage. Like they liked it. True. It was cool. It was cute, but Monastery Swift Spear, thank you, was so popular. And this was so not that card. And they're like, it doesn't have haste. It's not that good. Oh, it's that good.
Right.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
So you needed a way to deal with indestructible creatures, because if you're to do anything with a god set, you have to have a way to kill the gods. And I mentioned before, this was a really fresh take on red, because red's answer to most things is just throw a burn spell at it. And that doesn't work with indestructible creatures. And that's the downside with burn spells, is that creatures just naturally regenerate at the end of the turn. And so, red sometimes finds itself in this awkward situation where they can't deal with things that are bigger than it. And this really gave red another interesting tool in their toolbox of, what if your burn spells could do permanent damage? What if it could apply these like wither-like counters to things, and you could knock things down to your size and then get rid of them? And so I love this, and this has gone on to see play in both modern and legacy. There is a legacy version of Prowess that is out right now that plays things like Crash Through, and is very much doing this and Swift Spear. And this card really just spawned a whole other archetype.
For those who don't know, Soulscar Mage is 1 red mana for a 1/2 rare human wizard with prowess, and if a source you control would deal non-combat damage to a creature an opponent controls, put that many -1/-1 counters on that creature instead. And this unique ability, I have tried to not craft wild cards on Arena for this card. It's not replaceable. You can't, nothing does what it does.
Shrinking down your opponent's hazarets, shrinking down your opponent's Ronases is a huge deal, especially when you can... it works with burn spells, obviously, right? Like shock mid-combat, have your thing survive.
Right.
But it also works with Goblin Chain Whirler. It also works with Chandra Torch of Defiance. It works with other non-spell effects, as long as it's not combat damage.
Totally.
And so this thing, and we've talked about... Aggro decks in particular live and die by their 1-drops, and you can't just have one of them. Red had Bomat Courier for a long time. Then Soulscar Mage came around, and it was like, we finally have the second 1-drop that we can... It was the same with zombies. They needed 2 good 1-drops. You need those 8 slots in your deck to be able to play something early. And this was the perfect thing. And it's also a good example. Again, this probably wouldn't have topped my list or been on my list, even my list, if we had done Amonkhet before it saw a standard play, because it was kind of, it suffered from the same thing that Glint Sleeve Siphoner suffered from, which is you're comparing it to an all-time great.
Right.
You're comparing it to Monastery Swift Spear, and you look at this and you go, that's not Monastery Swift Spear. I would much rather have haste than put -1/-1 counters on it.
Right.
But you're looking at it wrong. You're looking at it from you're holding it to too high a standard, and you're also holding it to a standard of a different standard, right? And so Soulscar Mage is probably better in Amonkhet based on what it had to deal with and against than Monastery Swiftspear would have been. So yeah, Soulscar Mage is an absolute all-star, continues to see play, and it will for the foreseeable future. I can't imagine they print anything better than this.
I hope not.
It's got 2 toughness.
It's also one of those things where it's like, I feel like at the time we were like, this is to deal with those gods or whatever. This is a cute little metagame thing and whatever. No, this card is the real deal.
Absolutely.
And that was our top 10 Amonkhet cards. You'll see them on the screen right now. For your review, take a look at my list, Aaron's list, Ruben's top 10, and we want to hear from you about what card we did not talk about, and we'll select our favorite to win a $50 gift certificate to coolstuffinc.com. But before we go, I want to thank my co-hosts. Thank you, Aaron.
And catch you later.
Thank you, Ruben.
Fond red deck memories with my retro shades.
We go to our final slide. I want to thank our sponsor, CoolStuffInc.com, our co-sponsors, CardHoarder.com and AlterSleeves.com, my co-host, Aaron Campbell and Ruben Bressler, you guys for watching and listening. I hope you support us at Patreon.com/MagicMikes. Follow, like, tweet, favorite, share, subscribe to everything social that tells people we exist. Catch us online at Twitch.tv at Magic Mikes, on Twitter at Magic Mikes Cast, our Magic Mikes subreddit, and like the Magic Mikes page on Facebook. Or join us here next week, same time, same place, for another episode of Magic Mikes. Good night, everybody.